So if I go start a new project, there's a couple of important things to think about when you're creating stuff in a model. So first of all, unless you're doing something really like twisty and organic, the only time that you should use the massing tool is to mass out big chunks of the building, for example. So if I clicked on mass in place and then give it a name, and I'm going to draw some rectangular shape and then click create form. So I could create a whole bunch of shapes like this. Notice I actually, let me undo that. So if I press the tab key so that I select this side and then select the rectangle tool, it automatically drew it on that face. So now if I select that new rectangle and click create form, now it created a form off the side. So you can see in this case though, it didn't make some sort of void automatically like SketchUp would. And there's actually a reason for that. So right now I'm just kind of getting off on a little bit of a tangent related to creating forms and within the mass element. But when you select an outline like this one and click create form, it actually creates a solid form. But there's a drop down here for create form, and there's an option here called create void form. And so in this case, it actually does cut a hole in the geometry. But even after you've created the mass element, like this one I created with the solid mode, when I select the whole thing, over in properties you can toggle between solid and void. And because of the material being used, it's a little bit hard to see. But those are both voids now that are cutting into that object. So long story short, I'm going to click finish, and let's just say this is like the entire massing of the building, just to position something roughly on a site, to look at shadow lines. And then if we jump to something more granular, like a piece of furniture, because I've had people even at LHB here who sort of figured out the massing tool, like in the project environment context, and then didn't really realize when to stop using that and would start to use it for like furniture and stuff like that. So if I were to do that, so mass in place, and I'm going to call this a table or something like that, just to get really granular. And then you make this small thing and you create a form and then you finish it. Well, now you have this family called a table. So if I expand families and go down to the massing category, there's this thing here called a table. And so at this point, it doesn't seem like there'd be anything wrong with that. You go to the plan view and you can see this table. But where the actual problem though is that the only reason we see that table right now is because when we first clicked on the massing tool, it toggled Revit into this mode. So you could do this manually if you went to the massing and site tab and then click this drop down on the far left. And there's this option to show mass, form, and floors. So again, when you initiate a mass command, it just kicks you into this. There's a dialog that says it's going to do it. But right now we see this big mass and then this table. But if I go into the visibility and graphics dialog, the mass category is actually turned off. So how are we seeing mass elements if the category is turned off? And that's because of this overall project-wide toggle to show mass, form, and floors, no matter what. The default is, and if somebody else opened this project, or even if you opened it again later, it's show mass by view settings, which we were just in the view settings and it said don't show it. So if I click that, then all of a sudden everything disappears, versus doing this to make it everything show up everywhere. So right now with it completely off, I could go into VV or VG, and then I could actually turn the mass category on. So now in this view, it's always going to show up no matter what. But that you can't really depend on because all views are set up to not show mass elements. So when you're cutting sections and creating 3D views, that stuff's just going to continue not showing up, and it's going to be a hassle. So creating a mass for something like this really isn't a great idea. So basically the moral of the story is that once you get past this really early schematic design and you're starting to draw Revit walls and roof elements, you pretty much stop using the mass tool altogether, with one exception. So creating sloped walls. So I'm going to have to make a mass that can support that sloped wall. And then when I click the wall command and pick face, so it just created a wall based on that face. And now when you turn off the mass visibility, you just have your sloped wall. And you can't delete that mass because then you won't be able to change the slope of this wall later if you need to, without deleting the wall, creating a new mass, and then creating a new wall on that mass. And so this is where that whole system actually is pretty elegant. The mass doesn't show up everywhere by default because you actually don't want it to show up. Unless, of course, you need to change the slope. Then you'd use that toggle and edit the mass. And select it now. So I'm going to make it a much more extreme slope. And now if I select the wall, there's an option to update to face. So now it just automatically moved that wall to match that sloped surface of that mass element. All right, so if you're not supposed to use the mass element to draw something like a table, anybody have a guess as to what you would use?